So we haven't really discussed a specific format, but I think that the background here for everybody, because we've got people from both our communities here. So uh, Beth, do you want to do the initial sort of intro here, or what do you want to do?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I'm Beth Meisner. It's nice to see all of you. My husband was diagnosed with cancer a year and a half ago, and Eric and I and his wife Elise and my husband Ivan have known each other for a few years. And we started talking about health and nutrition, and our doctors were guiding us a certain direction, and Eric was saying some things that I hadn't heard any of them saying before, and so we started a conversation about health and nutrition really more in depth at that time. Um, about that same time, we had asked one of the doctors guiding us, who had said during a 3-month period he wanted Ivan to eliminate meat, that he could eat fish, seafood, that type of thing, but he wanted him to eliminate meat. And I wrote back and I said, you know, why do we have to eliminate meat? You know, he's got to get his proteins, et cetera, et cetera. And he sent me, I'm not kidding you, 20 medical journal abstracts showing that meat is linked to the development of cancer. And I said, okay, I give. And my journey over the last year and a half has really been centered around how to eat in a way that nourishes the body and doesn't encourage cancer growth. My husband's now in remission, and it only took 9 months to get there. So I know what Eric's onto is powerful, and what we're doing is powerful. And I know Eric has a very interesting perspective on how to eat meat, when to eat meat, and that type of thing, and I want to know more about that and share that with my community too. I've started a website called the Meisner Plan, and at that website we just are sharing what Ivan has been doing, so maybe it will encourage others to make some changes in their diets as well that might have positive benefits for them. Paula, who's on the call, is in that group, and Becky is a brand new participant in our group, and we've got about 20 people in our beta group and 4 people in our August challenge that are taking it on. I just got an email this morning from one of our colleagues' wife who said, I really like everything you have in the Meisner Plan. I just want to encourage you to be realistic because this is very severe and very extreme, and people are not going to make these kinds of changes, and I just want to give you a heads up. And I think she's wrong. I think that people will see pretty quickly the positive impact if they give it a try and they just give it 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I think she's wrong. So I'm here to learn more from Eric.
Well, Beth, I love that. I've been in this sort of health kick thing in some form or another for about 20 years, and at different times I've had different levels of share with the public about a dramatic turnaround in my own health that I became like the Jehovah's Witness of food. I was like knocking on doors telling people how to change, and getting and doing seminars and that kind of stuff. And one of the most common comments, and I still hear it today, even as I've mellowed over this stuff over the years, I still hear this frequently, is, but Eric, I mean, this is so hard.
Me
Something
too.
similar. So extreme. Who's going to do this? Who's going to eat this way? There he is.
Are you there? We can see you.
If we only knew sign language. All right, who can read lips?
And the problem is because
All
there's
right.
no sound. There he is.
Testing 1, 2.
Yay.
All right. So what I was saying was that I would be off teaching this stuff or coaching people or teaching seminars or whatever, and people would always say to me, but Eric, this is like so harsh. What about everything in moderation? And my answer to that's real simple. I don't want health in moderation. Like, I've seen what moderate health looks like. Moderate health means a heart attack at a moderate age and diabetes at a moderate age. I'm not interested in that. So I'm willing to go a little further than moderate when I take my view on health. And I got to say, Beth, one of the things I had a bit of a smile now. You're going, well, my husband Ivan was diagnosed with this, and then he did these things, and now he's in remission. And you say it all like totally matter-of-factly. And it's so interesting because it's become matter-of-fact, right? But can you imagine if we could go back and 18 months ago, the Beth of 18 months ago could hear you saying this, she would not be dealing with it matter-of-factly.
Right, that's right. And I didn't even mention that I don't wear hearing aids anymore, and I'm taking 0 medication now, which I was on 4 medications when this all started. So, yeah, and people say to me, wow, it's such a miracle. It's a miracle that this has happened, and I'm at the place now where I'm thinking, it is not a miracle. It's supposed to work this way.
Yeah, it's funny, Beth, because in San Diego last week, I had totally forgotten about the hearing aid thing. So for everybody else, the background was that Beth and I started speaking pretty regularly about Ivan and health and food and this kind of stuff, and we'd had a long conversation about dairy products and what have you. And so Beth decided. She emails me a couple of times and says, "Hey, my hearing's come back." And it's funny because the way she said it was, yeah, and then I was able to take my hearing aids out. And my wife Elise, who's sitting at the table, who's heard me talk about food more too often, she goes, "Oh, did you take out the hearing aids so you didn't have to listen to Eric anymore?" No, it's because her hearing came back. Yeah. So anyway, today I think really we want to talk about today is meat. Give you guys some organizing principles about the way I think about meat. I want you to know that I was a vegan for 7 years, and vehemently, and started my whole health movement writing a book that was proving veganism. And so what I want to before getting to that topic and how vegetarianism may or may not work, or how meat may or may not work, I want to underline one of the very key principles of human health that is understated in any single purpose that they were designed for. So, for example, but hell, you want to lose weight radically? It'll work. I mean, it might kill you by weight. And if you want to, add on programs to help you, so there are diets that have these kind of single sort of monofocused ideas about the way life should be. But the reality is that humans evolved in a seasonal nature. That is, that we lived through various seasonal changes. So there were times when were plentiful and then not available at all. Or when water became really available and drought was there. And our body has had this seasonality, but also not only but to pass through these different seasons. And so this is important about the way meat should be consumed, if it's consumed at all. And also it contributes to this issue of, Beth earlier mentioned all these abstracts, linking meat to cancer and so on. Sorry guys, I'm seeing some notes about the internet. I want to tell you there's good news about that. My experience is that when the video shows up on YouTube, that they do a very good job of capturing the audio for the recording. So sometimes when it's not good live, it's still good in the recording. So hopefully that's going to be the case this time around. And I'll try to slow down a little. Maybe that'll help. So this idea of Joseph, I'm totally with you on the more bandwidth. I live in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and I have the biggest pipe they'll sell me, and that's the best I can do right now. But I'm moving to faster internet soon. So, but back to the seasonality issue. Our bodies evolved to not only survive these various seasonal shifts, but actually to optimize for them. And I want to give you one good example. For example, is sugar. We know that eating sugar causes our bodies to inhibit the production of a hormone called glucagon. And one of the things that glucagon does is control whether or not you store sugar as fat or burn fat. If you produce glucagon, then you burn fat. If you don't produce, if you inhibit glucagon, then it becomes harder to burn fat. And that's by design because it's preparing you for winter. During winter, you need to have more calories stored on your body, and you need to have more water stored in your body. And so we take sugar from nature because that's when most fruits and berries are ripening in the late fall, late summer, early fall, to say, hey, winter's coming. So this seasonal trigger is extremely important to us, and you only have to visit small sections of America to see that there are a lot of people winter that's never going to continue to be heavily available. That same cyclical nature of sugar eating applies to meat eating as well. So when we go back to the abstracts that Beth mentioned about, you know, these direct links between meat eating and cancer, well, that's because meat, it's not meat eating itself, it's meat eating 3 meals a day, bad quality meat every day, that becomes a major, major trigger for cancer. So now what happens is unacceptable levels of cancer cells in their body. The reason is that they've been eating meat probably in excess for most of their life, and then all of a sudden they've got this cancer situation, and they've never had the no meat season, and there would have been many no meat seasons in nature. So there would have been times when you were vegan, not because you were or even health conscious, just because nature made it that way. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you'd kill a mammoth or an elephant or an antelope and you'd have meat again, and you would gorge on meat. So this cyclical nature of meat is really, really important because I don't know how many of you have seen, for example, the movie Forks Over Knives, which is based on the China study. But you'll notice there's a graph in that movie. They show this graph, and it shows meat eating on the incline, and right there with it, cancer cell on the incline, and then move on. The reason they move on is if you were to stop the frame right then and stop the movie and hit pause, seeing that as soon as meat eating dropped off, cancer cell production also dropped off. That's because it's meant to be seasonal. So, for example, if you right now are concerned about having a high level of cancer cells in your body, you should meat of any kind. So to deal with Paula's question, yes, fish is a meat. Any protein falls into this category, animal protein. So this applies to dairy, meat, eggs. Any of the animal proteins are going to contribute to cancer. So if you've got cancer cells in your body, if you're or an unacceptable level of cancer cells in your body, because we all have them, but if you're worried about cancer, then you shouldn't relax at all until you come through the window where you feel safe about it again. But now there's another big consideration, and that is that not all meat is created equal. And I want to, the way I discovered this for myself was, and there's plenty of other places to discover it, but the way I realized it was a very simple, funny little situation where I happened to be visiting a cheetah breeding facility in South Africa. And in the cheetah breeding facility, they were having a really hard time getting the cheetahs to breed. And the reason they were having a hard time getting the cheetahs to breed initially was behavioral. Cheetahs who they'll breed with and when they'll breed. Once they sorted out that behavioral stuff, there was still a medical problem they couldn't get to the bottom of. And so they did all these tests to try to figure out, are they healthy? Are they, what's the sperm count like? All this kind of stuff. And one of the things they discovered was that their blood, that their blood was not right. That the blood of a captive cheetah was different than the blood of a wild cheetah. And the difference was that the blood of a captive cheetah had fat globules in it, and that the fat cells were stuck together. The little blood discs were flowing around freely and beautifully and uninhibited, and so oxygen was being delivered around the body properly. But the problem was, wait a second, the captive cheetahs were eating they were eating the exact same things as the wild cheetahs. They were eating meat because they're meat eaters. They weren't eating the same meat as the wild cheetahs. The wild cheetahs were eating antelopes. Body fat. Cows and horses that were donated by local farms that have 30 to 50%, say 40% body fat. That is a massive, massive increase in fat, and an increase that cheetah systems couldn't at all deal with. And the consequence of that is that they had become infertile. They could not breed anymore. And there is study after study that shows that if men, human men in America today, continue to have sperm count degradation at the level they are today, that most men will not be able to breed past 2050. Well, I'm not saying this is all about meat, but I'm saying that it is about lifestyle. And if we saw it happen with the cheetahs, and the only change they made, they were not eating chocolate-covered frosted sugar bombs and milkshakes and all that other rubbish. All they had done is switched from the healthy, natural, wild meat that they evolved to eat to production meat. And that change itself caused infertility and disease and what have you. So the principle here that we're really talking about is that, first of all, the principles is that meat should be eaten seasonally. It's not something that should be happening every day. You should have long stretches. I was vegan for 4 months last year. I call myself the carnivorous vegetarian. I was vegan for 4 months. and I think Elise can correct me here. Elise is over here, my wife. We were, what, 9 days or something last month, I think. We did a 9-day no-meat stretch. So I was vegan again for nine days last month. I believe that long stretches of no meat are absolutely imperative to you because that's how you evolved. But that, some meat, on occasion, is actually good for you and probably, one could argue, required to some degree. Vitamin B12, we know, comes from eating animal products. And some people now argue, like in Eat Forks Over Knives, they you know, what do they say? They say that we're supposed to be getting our B12 from the soil that we wash off our food. Well, what is soil? I hate to say this to you, it's a little harsh, but it's decaying animals that have died and they're in the soil. So it's still B12 coming from an animal. I just, you know, prefer it as a buffalo steak. So the first principle is that there should be a seasonality to it. And the second principle is that the quantity should be dramatically less than what most people are eating. Honest to goodness, I don't believe that animal protein should make up any more than 10 to 15% of your overall food intake. It shouldn't be that. I mean, that's as good as that's as high as it needs to be. And then the third principle is the quality of the meat you're eating. Now, here's meat you should never eat: normal production quality beef, normal production quality pork, normal production quality anything. It's just not good for you on any level. Now you go up a level from that. Okay, organic, grass-fed, never grain-fed, but organic, grass-fed beef and that sort of stuff. Look, I don't do that very often. I've probably done it, I want to say 10 times in the last 20 years. It's something very rare for me. But if you're going to eat beef, that's going to be the beef to eat. But the ideal stuff that you would eat would be things that are wild caught or wild raised or genetically wild. So, for example, wild fish and bison, ostrich, elk, moose, the natural meats, like the cheetah needs, you're the same. Those natural meats are the meats that we should be eating. So those are the key 3 principles. I kind of wanted to dump all that out, and now we can just kind of have a free-for-all Q&A and discussion.
So my first question, I got 2 questions for you, Eric. The first question is the ostrich, because it's farmed now. So are you finding that meat is becoming less healthy because it's being farmed?
So there's 2 aspects to that question. One has to do, and the other one has to do with the principle of genetic modification. So let me deal with the principle of genetic modification first. I first want to say this, that I believe that GMO production of food is the most likely thing to cause the extinction of human beings on Earth. It's the dangerous thing that humans do. It's more dangerous than nuclear power or nuclear weapons. Biowarfare start causing real problems. And I want to describe one of the reasons for that. So when you think about a cow, we don't think of a cow. See, there's two kinds of GMO. There's GMO by unnatural selection, and there's GMO by deletion. In fact, there's a third kind of GMO, genetic modification through natural selection, because we're constantly having natural selection, right? So that's the normal, natural type of genetic modification. That's how Australopithecine was a tiny foot animal, and today we can be 6 feet. That's called, but it was done through evolutionary process. It was done, so that's genetic modification done through natural selection. Then you've got genetic modification done through unnatural selection. So that's breeding. That's why we can have all these bizarre-looking dog species. That would never happen in nature, right? A Chihuahua would not last 5 seconds in Kruger National Park. So genetic modification of meat has happened the same way. So the cow, an animal called an oryx, and it was 4% fat, just like a buffalo today would be, or an elephant, or an antelope. It was 4% fat. And what happened is that we started domesticating them and breeding them. Well, of course, as you start domesticating and breeding oryxes, you start breeding them for A, flavor, which means more fat, and also for how much money they become worth as economics start getting into the game, which means heavier, which means more fat. So over the space of the last 15,000 years, we've been able to take the oryx and turn it into a super tasty, high-fat heart attack. That's what we've been able to do. Now, the detriment of this genetic modification over the last 15,000 years didn't really start to show up until we got to a place where the animal was at the highest level of fat. Yes, there's some showing up of it earlier on, but now let's just talk about doctors from World War II that were also in the Vietnam War. So a doctor that was in World War II, was operating on soldiers in World War II, and also operating on soldiers in the Vietnam War. They wrote tons of there's amazing stories that you can read about this, where they were noticing a substantial increase in the arterial plaque in the soldiers from Vietnam versus World War II. This is only a couple of decades apart, and what's even scarier about that is that the average age of a soldier in World War II was 26. In Vietnam, it was only 19 years old. So now you've got these students, or these kids at 19, already showing signs of heart disease because the meat they're eating, remember between World War II and Vietnam, was that meat went through the roof. America became suddenly very wealthy, and you're eating meat at 3 meals a day, and you're eating what effectively was genetically modified meat that had artificial levels of fat in it, which is cow, 40%. And by the way, this number of 40%, that's not even the scary number. Do the ratios with me here. Normally I'd love to show you some slides. I don't have them handy. But if you think of it this way, if you have 100 grams of beef and 100 grams of auric, or a buffalo or elk, okay? 100 grams of beef will have 40 grams of fat in it, whereas the other wild meat would only have 4 grams of fat. So you're 10 times as much fat. Saturated to unsaturated ratio. So a buffalo has 60% unsaturated fat, and 40% as it switched the other way around. 60% saturated, 40% unsaturated. This is important because saturated fat is the fat that is dangerous. So now what that means is out of that same 100 grams of buffalo, you would only have 1.6 grams of saturated fat. In the beef, you'd have 24 grams of saturated fat. This is why that's why I'm saying to you, not all meat is created equal. And that is the first type of genetic modification, is you just breed this stuff over thousands of years, and you suddenly get this super fat cows. So going back to your question, Beth, ostrich, if it's being farmed today, is not going to, like ostrich and buffalo, which are being farmed these days, they're not going to be genetically modified in the time frame that's going to affect your lifestyle, or your child's, or even your grandchild's. It takes a long time to make these genetic changes in the animal. So from a genetic perspective, ostrich will still have a propensity for having lower fat numbers and having a healthier meat composition than beef, a genetic propensity. But then you get into the next question, of course, which is the quality of the farming. Like, what are they feeding the animals? So luckily, in America, it seems there are some really strict rules about how you raise buffalo. Like, they have to be free range and that sort of stuff. So even though they're farmed, it seems for the most part, it's still they're being properly in the meat. So if these days, if you're going to go with healthier meat and it's going to be, say, buffalo, it's going to be farmed, well, what you now need to do is make sure that the farming practice is good, ideally organic, ideally free range, and certainly not grain-fed.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps with that question, Beth.
Well, and then my second question had to do with eggs. Well, I know it's animal protein.
Sure.
We eat eggs every day from the neighbor's chickens,
yeah.
Not even from the store. Paula has her own
So the
chicken.
issue with eggs, yeah. So the issue with eggs is just like everything else. Record about this. Seasonality of a recommended daily allowance just pisses me off. Like, There's no such thing as a recommended daily allowance. The idea, this idea that there's this perfect number of daily vitamins and minerals that we can take in for ultimate, no. So let's just go for a walk through the Kruger National Park. How on earth are we going to find eggs every single day? Never going to happen. And I don't know if you've ever tried to take an egg from an ostrich, but it never goes well for you. They're extremely angry, and they have these claws on the front that can literally unzip you. So I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't have eaten eggs. What I'm saying is there's no way we would have. So again, eggs are eating every day. Again, now we have to go to this other issue, and that is how are they produced? If they come from corn-fed, no, not from grain-fed. You want free-range, organic, naturally produced eggs, and then you're doing the right thing. But again, not quantities that Americans tend to eat today. So, guys, from a commenting perspective, there's space to do this, and you know, this together. I think Beth froze for a minute there, but she's still here. You can comment in the chats on the side, and I'll try to see those. But also, we're now in free-form conversation. So if you've got a question and your camera's on, raise your hand, and we'll just get to you, because I'd rather do it that way than reading stuff. Karen, I see that you've got a bunch. You and I have had some interesting little chats on Facebook. Jump in. If you hover your mouse over your, in the top right-hand window, there should be like a little camera icon, a little mouse, a little microphone icon, top right-hand.
Is that it?
Yep.
There it is. Welcome. We can hear you.
Facebook.
It's Facebook. He's doing this via Facebook.
Okay, Karen, we can hear you, so jump in whenever you like. But I'm going to jump into a couple of the questions that we've seen here.
Hey, Eric?
Yes, go ahead. Jimmy.
Hey, it's Jimmy. Hey, I had a quick one just since you're saying this, just since we're not like able to go hunting every day and stuff like that. So just in a way of being practical, like I'm just trying to think like how would I get that kind of meat with, you know, I mean, we go out to eat at restaurants, and I could see like maybe we can find it at Whole Foods or something to buy some organic meat as like a next step up, but like just in a way of like normal everyday life, like how do you kind of work that in?
So, Jimmy, that's a really good question, and one of the issues is this, is that for the most part I would avoid eating meat from a restaurant 9 times out of 10. If you go to order a salmon in a restaurant, they make the distinction because mostly it's cheaper and easier for them to get farmed salmon, and I'm not a fan. So you want to, when you go to a restaurant, they're going to try to get the thing that's most economically interesting for them to get for you. So eating meat from a restaurant is generally not a good idea. There are exceptions. I'm a big fan of, for example, Charlie's in Tampa. And Charlie's is a steakhouse in Tampa, and I'll tell you something right now, they do an outstanding buffalo steak. You can go to Whole Foods just about anywhere today, and you can get buffalo meat fresh because they bring it in. In fact, one of my favorite things in the world at Whole Foods is buffalo ribs. They're like, you remember the old Fred Flintstone cartoon where they put that big thing on his car? They're like that. They're monster things. You throw them on the barbecue, and they're delicious. They're amazing. So, and any butcher worth his salt is going to know where to get other meat like that. So my view is this: if you're traveling or if you're having to go eat out and so on, those are vegan days. Don't eat bad quality meat. Now, and also think about this. This is a funny psychological thing about meat. We have these huge evolutionary drivers in us. There are two evolutionary drivers in us. There are more, but I just want to eat as high nutrient-dense foods as you can and to eat as much as possible. Because for 99%, the #1 cause of death is inflammation. So we have this powerful drive to eat the highest nutrients possible. Driver number 2, do the least amount of exercise possible, because we were always starving. So we didn't want to burn energy we didn't have to burn. Now, if you think about those 2 drivers, eat the highest nutrient-dense foods you can and eat as much as possible, and move as little as possible, you can begin.
Oh, it froze up on me. I don't know if anyone's frozen.
I don't think it's just you. I think it's his internet.
Okay.
So was he being sincere when he was saying, honestly, eat as much of the good stuff as we can and move as little as possible, or was he being facetious? I can't tell.
I think we're missing the before and the after of what he's saying, that, you know, and contextually, I think that what he's saying is important. And I think that we're missing the whole entire point.
I think he's saying that that's what's natural for us to do. And Eric, are you back?
And your audio. Get your audio.
All right, I'm back.
Okay.
Yay.
It was funny. I got dropped out, and then it said, you know, I tried to get back in. It said there are too many participants. I'll have to watch it on YouTube.
Thanks.
So remind me where we were.
We were just taking it from there and trying to figure out. We were like trying to see if you were serious when you said we should move as little as possible.
Right. So yeah. So those are evolutionary drivers. So of course, if you live in today's world where there's this unbelievable quantity of food, and then we've got this desire to be really, really lazy, it's not a good combination for health, right? So go to a restaurant and you have a choice between steak and a vegetable stir fry. Your instincts, if you're a meat eater, if you're predisposed to gain, your instinct is to eat steak, right? You're sitting there in the restaurant. The steak is in front of you. The stir fry is there. The vegetable stir fry. Your instincts are going to say the highest nutrient-dense food in front of me is right there. It's going to be the steak. So that's normal. But it's our policy that before you eat the steak, you have to run around the block 6 times and do 20 push-ups. Wow, you'd have to think twice about that steak. You'd be like, geez, you know, no, today I'm going to order the veg stir fry. Sure, occasionally you'd be willing to do the work to go get the steak because you'd have this, and the longer you went without. In nature, that's what the decision was more like. When you walk around the bush in Africa, it's not like there's a steak sitting on a plate. It requires an unbelievable amount of effort to go get it. And in our world today, that effort isn't there, so we overeat on it because our kids want to eat it and do the least amount of work possible. So when you're traveling, when you're in restaurants, when you're on the road, recognize that you're probably best off to be maybe in more of a vegan season at that stage. But then when you get home or when you're meat source, stays in your system apparently for 6 to 18 months. That suggests that even if you went for months without meat, you'd be okay. But I can tell you something. Time and time again, I meet people that are pure vegan, and when they hit the 18-month mark, anemia, they start looking gaunt. That is way too long to go without meat, in my opinion. And I think men are more susceptible to that than women. And I believe that the reason for that is that, when Elise and I have been off with the Bushmen in Africa, which we've done a number of times, as most of you know, what's interesting is when I go hunting with men and we get something, I hate to tell you this, they don't back to the village. Men traditionally would have eaten a lot more meat than women, so I think men are more susceptible when meat for a long time. Did you get your mic working? Is everything good?
Mine?
No, I was asking Karen because she was trying to. Did I get your question, Jimmy?
Yeah, I mean, just the more tips like that that I can get, the better. Because yeah, just it seems really like I don't know where to get protein from plant sources as well, because I don't really eat soy and
you shouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, and so but I do like work out and I lift weights and stuff sometimes, so I kind of feel like I need more protein. So I'm like sometimes looking to, and I mean I usually do try to look to like fish or something if I'm at a restaurant, and you know.
The distinction between meat and fish from an animal protein perspective isn't dramatically different. At the end of the day, I know. I mean, I've seen you. You're ripped and you work out a lot and so on, and that's going to drive you to want to eat more. And so what I'm saying to you is remember the seasonality. Give your body a break from meat every now and again, and eat the highest quality meat that you possibly can. Also, I want you to consider what time of life do you believe you would have required the highest amount of meat, or sorry, the highest amount of protein? At what stage of your life?
Like the teenage years, I would guess.
Actually, it would probably be the first 18 months because you're doubling in size, right? You're like double.
Okay,
So you require a huge amount of protein.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that fruit, by weight, has more protein in it than meat does. So it's a funny, you know, I'm not down on meat. I'm just saying to you that this idea of the huge amounts of protein that we need are largely a politically motivated thing. We don't need nearly the quantity they tell us, but we do need it. And so what I'm saying to you is, when you do, like for example, my big deal is if I'm going to go out and have, like I have a salmon steak, I'm going to be having I've got a wild caught salmon at the grocery store today. I'm going to have that today. I already did go for a run before I eat the steak because I know that that's how my body's going to want it best, because in nature it would have been that way. And you know, Karen, you're absolutely right. The different fishes and different types of fish-based proteins are different than meat. There's no question about it. This conversation has come on from animal protein might make contributing to cancer, and in that sense, animal protein does that. But yeah, there's no question. Meats are not created equal. One of the issues is shellfish. Is like I'm a big fan, not on any kind of a daily basis, but I like to make sure that I get some shellfish in every now and again because it has the right combinations of fats that we need to have and so on. So, Jimmy, I hope that answers your question. And
yeah.
Karen, if you've got your mic in, jump in anytime.
There's my mic.
I've never seen you this quiet once on.
You've never seen me what?
I've never seen you this quiet on Facebook ever, so I know
I'm not usually quiet. I wanted to jump in a bunch of times.
Go for it.
What? Well, okay, so about the eggs. Eggs aren't inherently the problem, but the way we produce eggs in this country is inherently a problem.
Absolutely.
And you're absolutely right about not all meat is created equal. So I'll tell you what I do when I travel, because I can't survive on just simply veggies, and I have issues with I have to get my protein sources for the day. So being a vegan for a day is not something that works for me personally. So what I do is I take my food with me. Getting beef jerky that's grass-fed is really hard to do, but if you can do it, make it. Or alternatively, another thing that I do, since we're talking about fish, is I can run around the country with sardines and put them on salad with olive oil and balsamic vinegar or whatever. Usually it's just olive oil and pepper, but that works for me. And it also keeps me sane without feeling like I'm drained because I haven't had my protein content for the day. What else was question? What else? I think that's it. I got more.
So, Karen, I've seen you comment on some of these things. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've seen stuff on Facebook and on disagreement. The one thing that I want to point out to you is that there would have been very rare times ever evolutionarily where you would have had access to meat on a daily basis at all. The closest the closest time that might have happened would have been, you know, when we have like, you know, the people that were living in the caves around the Cape, around the southern coast of South Africa, that lived in the caves and constantly had a relative flow of shellfish and seafood and so on. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with that, and the reason being is because we would have eaten squirrels, we would have eaten raccoons, we would have eaten insects, we would have eaten grubs. We had plenty of sources of protein on a daily basis. It just wouldn't have been looking like the stuff that we consume today. It would have been a lot more varied.
That's true. That's true. It's one that I often tell vegans that even elephants are not vegan. Elephants eat grass, but they probably eat something in the realm of a quarter pound of insects every day. It's not, nobody thinks of that as being part of their diet, but they can't help it because the insects are on the grass. So you're right that there would have been a level of that going on, but there also would have been long stretches with not being, I mean, we've been out with the Bushmen. There's days where they just aren't that lucky. You say we would have just eaten squirrels. I have spent 45 minutes trying to catch a single squirrel with 5 Bushmen, and we didn't catch it. So the reason that this is a really important distinction is there is no doubt anywhere in the credible scientific world these days that animal protein has a direct relationship to cancer cell production. These days it's just, there's a direct relationship that, and the minute you stop eating animal protein, cancer cell production goes down. But that's not because meat's bad. It's because it's supposed to be seasonal. You're supposed to be in a place where, yeah, we've killed a mammoth and we're eating a ton of meat that day. That's different than eating a couple of grubs the next day. But we would never have been fortunate enough to be just constantly eating meat every day. And so I guess what I'm really getting at is remember seasonality. It wouldn't have been practical to be able to eat meat every single day. I see a level of disbelief. You and I will definitely have chances to talk this through. And one day what you really want to do is come with us and come stay with the Bushmen and see what it looks like to live Stone Age. It's not easy. Any other questions and comments? Again, in the comments bar or just generally speak, no holds barred. We can say whatever we like.
Eric, it's Paul Coker here.
Paul, jump in.
Quite interesting that you're talking about meat and protein, and you shouldn't overlook the fact that high quality proteins and proteins in general will actually convert to glucose in the absence of carbohydrate. Therefore, will they in fact have an insulin response? And if you eat high quality game meats, will that have less of an insulin reaction than production beef or chicken or pork?
I'm not sure I follow you. I have a bit of a glitch on the audio.
Okay. What I'm saying is you will convert protein into glucose in the absence of carbohydrate. Your body will do that, and you will require some insulin to do that.
Yes.
So I was just wondering if there was anything out there showing that you needed less insulin to convert the proteins in high quality game meats than production meat.
I don't know the answer. It's a good question. We'll look into it.
Okay, thank you.
Who's next?
Eric, it's Paula.
Paula, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Would you give us an idea of like what's a usual day? What's a breakfast look like, a lunch look like, and a dinner look like on an average day? Because that's my thing. I just need to create lots of average days when it comes to meal planning. I'm a planner because I do travel a lot. I've got 4 kids, and so I don't feel like I'm missing anything. I'm super excited about committing to this plan, and I'm doing well on it. But planning is my best friend. So I have to look ahead like a week at a time at my schedule, their schedule, to make it happen.
I'm with you, Paula. So I think the stuff is first of all, let's go back to my comment about the idea of an RDA or a recommended daily allowance or a perfect, there's no such thing as a perfect balanced meal. There's no one, daily plan or one meal that's perfect. And so what we tend to do is take a look and say, what season do we have a view that we're in at the moment? So for example, fruit is a really, really seasonal thing. So if we're ever spending some time together, you'll either see that I'm eating a lot of fruit. I just make a decision about my food. And so what I would tend to do in your situation, so you look at, say, the phase of the Meisner plan you're on, and you look at the rules that were within that phase, or you look at the season that you're expecting yourself to be in. And I'm not talking about the actual North American or European season you're living in. I'm talking more about the recognition that there should be seasonal patterns to your food. So if you take a look and say, well, hey, I'm in a season right now where I am eating fruit and I am eating this and that, then I would plan around that. But most consistently, my days will consist of these green smoothies. I've just finished one here as I've been having one with you that is heavy amounts of greens, far more than I would be able to chew because I just don't have time. I have too much other things to do than to sit and chew vegetables all day long. But I eat a ton of green smoothies in the morning. And then I'll have, like, if I have wild caught salmon or buffalo or something like that. I love Karen's comments on when you can get beef jerky. Like, I come from South Africa, so we would quite often get which is a dried rather than version of beef jerky. And having little snacks are vitally important. But rather than trying to think of there being a perfect meal plan for a given day, that's really difficult. I think what's better is to say, this is the meal plan that I'm having for this month or this week, and then planning around that construct or planning around those rules. I'm sure that doesn't help as much as you would have liked, but the only people who want us to have a perfect meal plan every day are people like Kellogg, who invented the 4 food groups. The idea of they did that to make us eat grains. Well, instead we have to look and say we're Homo sapiens. There are things that we need, and there's a seasonality to those things. And so I'm going to choose the season I'm in, and I'm going to plan my week around that season.
Fair enough, and I guess that's why I asked what's the average day versus the perfect day look like, because right. I'm with you. If we're striving for perfect, I'm going to fall short. But if I'm striving for average, I can hit it every time.
Yeah, I mean, look, the most key consistent principles on a daily basis, if you don't have any health challenges, like, when people have specific health challenges, they often need to make specific changes relative to those health challenges. Like, I'll tell you that if somebody has weight loss as a goal, then fruit should be out of season for a long time. Triggers in you the desire to, it triggers in your body the desire. So if you're trying to lose weight, then you wouldn't want to eat fruit. But if you're not trying to lose weight, then that wouldn't be as big an issue to you. And so, but the most consistent healthy day, in my opinion, is an unreasonable amount of raw vegetables, and obviously sometimes we need to cook stuff here. A reasonable amount of raw vegetables, the healthiest, most responsibly produced animal proteins you can get, and that's the crux of it. Those are the main things. Anything beyond that, to me, is filler. Brown rice from time to time, filler. I mean, go for it, but I don't think it's going to do particularly great things for you. It just might help you feel more full.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Cool. Any other last ones here?
We should do another call about grains.
Any last comments, questions?
Can you hear me, Eric?
Yes, having a call about grains.
Yeah, because that's still, I mean, there'll be times where our breakfast is wild rice with a few vegetables thrown in, so that's probably a shift that needs to come.
Beth, I really wouldn't worry about the wild rice. I mean, to me, it's a neutral food. You can totally live without it, but I don't think it's going to do you any particular harm unless weight loss is. Remember, it's a carbohydrate, so if you're trying to, if somebody's trying to lose weight, then it's not ideal. But it is a nice comfort food. White rice, well-produced organic brown rice. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes that's nice to have. One of the key things, though, is don't eat it with meat. Don't eat any starches. Like to the degree that you're still eating breads and pastas, which I hope you're not. I know you aren't, but the rest of I hope they're not. But to the degree that you are eating any kind of starches, don't eat them with meat, because your body produces alkaline fluids to break down starches, and your body produces acidic fluids to break down animal products. And alkalines and acidity, alkaline and acidity counteract each other. They neutralize. So if you eat, potatoes, then what happens is your body just chokes on that. It says, I don't really know what to do with meat and potatoes because I've got acids to break down the meat, I got starch or alkalines to break down the starch, and you end up neutralizing the digestive process. So it's really important to combine those foods correctly. Again, it wouldn't have been all that common that you would have gone out and scored a bunch of animal protein in nature and then sat down with a piece of garlic bread. It wouldn't happen that often in nature. Having said that, it's not like it would never have happened. While the garlic bread would have never happened, root vegetables are starchy, and they certainly those. On the whole, these things are not meant to be eaten together. But Beth, onto the grains. I'm totally happy to do that. Grains are one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest health challenges that we face in the Western. But rice is not probably one of the big culprits. But wheat certainly, wheat is a big challenge to us.
Which we don't eat that at all anymore.
No. Well, and the short version on grains is really kind of interesting. We on our, because we've just moved into the no grain phase, and the short version on grains is to recognize that a grain has a goal, and that goal is to drop onto the soil somewhere and germinate and become a plant, not that close to the parent. So what the grain wants is to be eaten, but it doesn't want to be digested. So it wants a bird to swoop down, pick up the grain, eat it, not fully digest it, and then drop it out somewhere far away from the parent plant. So that means that what the seeds have done over millions of years is figured out how to prevent digestion. So glutens and enzyme blockers are all parts of a grain like wheat. And of course, we've not been in that evolutionary race for very long. We've only been in that race for about 10, 12,000 years, 15. We have not developed the capability to deal with all those enzyme blockers and glutens and things that are in it. And so, when you eat grains, your system really doesn't know what to do with it. It kind of shuts down digestion. One of the things I pointed out to our group today is, why is it that restaurants feed you bread before the meal? As a kid, I always thought it was stupid marketing, because you feed somebody bread before the meal, they won't eat dessert. Only the truth is, it's exactly the opposite. If you give somebody bread before their meal, the odds are way higher that they'll order dessert, because the bread screws up their digestive system, and it means that they don't get the same nutrient load into the blood, and so their hypothalamus is monitoring their blood and saying, hey, have I had enough protein? Have I had enough nutrients intake? And the hypothalamus comes back and says, nope, not enough nutrients. Better order something else. So grains are particularly dangerous to us. They're a major part of the overeating cycle. Again, if you sit down and have spaghetti with pasta, you can always have seconds. But you have a nice piece of wild-caught salmon and a green salad, not so much with the seconds. It's because your hypothalamus says, I'm loaded. I've got the nutrients that I came for. So let's definitely do a grain conversation one of these days too.
That would be fascinating.
Cool. Any other comments before we jump, guys? I'm happy to. We've got another. Oh, actually, how long do we have? Yeah, I've got about another 5 minutes. So if there's anything last, otherwise, we're
Eric
on YouTube, and we can review it in the plan group and also in the WildFit group.
Eric, this is Dave Pendergrass. Can you hear me?
They keep the dialogue. Sorry, I heard somebody, but I don't know who.
It was me, Dave Pendergrass.
Hey, David, nice to see you. Or
how
hear you
are
anyway.
you? I guess
I'm great, thank you.
Good. I'm assuming you can hear me.
I can.
Good. I would respectfully disagree with a couple of things that you've said.
Sure.
The hypothalamus is not capable of sensing a lot of nutrients. It doesn't do that. It just doesn't. We don't have those kind of sensors. The sensors that we have are as follows. They are for medium chain and small chain fatty acids. They are for glucose, and they are for amino acids, and not all of the amino acids. That was first. Secondly, you said something about how the alkaline and acidity causes an issue, or they cancel each other out, I think is what you said, and I would respectfully disagree with that as well. It doesn't matter what you eat. The stomach is hyperacidic, pH of anywhere from 1 to 2, huge amounts of hydrogen ions, and then they're squirted into the duodenum, and they are immediately placed in an alkaline condition as soon as they get there. There are several transporters for chloride ions and for sodium ions and hydrogen ions that regulate the acidity levels that are there. So eating a grain with amino acids isn't in and of itself going to cause any changes in terms of absorption, because it's all regulated anyhow. By the time it gets to the ileum and the duodenum and the jejunum, it's all regulated by transporters. So I don't know I don't think that would be an issue in and of itself. And then
so David, let's deal with these one at a time.
Sure.
I'll let you keep going. I'll get the comments on the hypothetical. I can't, because it's been so long since I originally read about that stuff. But the principle is the same. That if your digestive system is slowed down by whatever it is you're doing, you're going to get a message from your body saying keep eating. And that's why, I mean, some foods are specifically irradiated to reduce their nutritional value so that you buy a second bag of processed potato chips, because you don't get any proper nutrition from them. So I'll look into that, and I appreciate the comment.
Can I piggyback on that, Eric, and share one perspective?
Sure, go ahead, Beth.
If the meat is not fully digested, and it often is not when it leaves the stomach and goes into the gut, it can begin to break down so slowly and putrefy in the gut that you start to have problems there with the acid-alkaline balance. So I think your point of eating the meat, letting it be digested and move into the digestive tract in the colon, the gut, the colon, and then maybe have the grains or something later is probably a wise suggestion.
Well, it's funny you say that, Beth, because that's kind of what I was going to address. So, David, when I first bumped into this concept of food, it was this idea of food combination and alkalinity, acidity, was actually discovered by the Canadian military, because they were trying to do peak performance training with soldiers to get them to their highest level of energy. And so what they found is that when you're eating a starch, your mouth produces much alkalinity, which gets swallowed into the stomach. Well, it's very basic chemistry that will have I mean, how many times have you? Maybe you didn't go through this, and I certainly didn't, because I wasn't a big drinker as a kid. But and never mind even drink. Sorry, drinking isn't the issue. How many times have you seen people eat pizza or something like that at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then for whatever reason they're sick the next day and they vomit pizza? That pizza should not be in their stomach anymore. And one of the reasons it's still in their stomach is that the concoction of things they put down into their stomach slowed up the digestive process, so they couldn't be transported out of the stomach properly. It shouldn't be in there 8 hours later or 10 hours later. So I'm all up for having a look at this. I'm all up for having a look at it. But when we first did this is 15 or so years ago, when I first stumbled into that whole food combining thing, we researched it pretty heavily. And then when you add to the sort of anecdotal aspect of it is, how can somebody vomit up food that they ate 10 hours earlier? It's undigested. How does that happen? So I guess it just raises a question on that point, and I'm happy to continue to have a dialogue about that, but I just wanted to address that one point. And I know you've got more, so carry on.
Okay. Maybe I just tell you who I am, and I have a PhD in biochemistry and physiology, and I teach graduate physiology. And so from my understanding of it, the reason why a pizza might not be digested is because of the fat content which is in it. Slows down the fat content, not the carbohydrate content. Carbohydrates are almost invariably processed to glucose and are easily transported in intestine, and that is in exchange for sodium ion with the transporters, which isn't altering the pH. So I don't think that's true, that we have changes in alkalinity. Like I said, it's very well regulated. The pH levels in the intestine and in the stomach, they're very well regulated. I think that the reason why people tend to eat, and I do agree that people do eat, but when they eat a pizza and they want to eat it later, has to do with some positive feedback signaling processes that go on in hypothalamus, in particular through the arcuate nucleus, counter-regulatory pathways. There's a positive signal from glucose-sensing neurons, and that positive signal, which is coupled with insulin secretion and GLP-1, which increases insulin secretion. This is what causes you to continue to eat, not because of the nutrients. It's actually directly a function of glucose rather than the lack of nutrients. So it's a very straightforward positive feedback system, probably left over from what you had talked about earlier about fruits being in season. When fruits, there was a tendency for us to eat as much fruit as we possibly could because it wasn't expressing for very long because it was seasonal, as you had said earlier. And so, like us and every other animal out there, including fungus and bacteria, I might add, whenever there were carbohydrates expressed, everybody was hardwired to go after as much carbohydrates as they could.
Absolutely.
So that ended the positive feedback cycle because there was no more carbohydrate sources. It was just expressed for such a short period of time. And then that brings me back to something you had said way earlier about eating meat. We absolutely ate meat as frequently as possible. We've made hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of species extinct because of our very good predatory capabilities of eating meat. And what Karen said earlier
also
about
the fact that most of those animals had no predatory defense against us when we arrived in their continents.
Precisely. I mean, we dominated everybody. The second we developed the ability to remember where their patterns of movement was, we absolutely had them. We absolutely had them on the hook, and we did. And so we had lots of access to protein, and on a daily basis. That was why they moved. They were hunter-gatherers. That's why they would move. They would go from one place to the next. As soon as there was a lack of meat in that little area that they happened to be, they would move 20 miles or whatever and forage that area. And so as a result, that's how we got started. We just had constant access to meat. That was the point.
So David, you know what? I think you and I need. I these and kind of hash some of these things out. I understand too, but this stuff. I'm really fascinated by it because the idea of us having constant access to meat is you really have to have spent a ton of time in Africa with African animals and then a ton of time in North America with North American animals. Let me tell you something. In Africa, we would have nowhere near a constant access to meat because African animals evolved alongside us and they're terrified of us. They will not let you get anywhere near them. Where American animals, you can even read this in early explorer journals, they would land on islands and be able to walk up and touch animals on the forehead. They had no flight avoidance for bipedal hunters, none. African animals have a fear avoidance ratio to man that is directly related to your ability to throw a rock. They know exactly how far you can throw. So when humans caused the first widespread human extinction of animals was probably the giant tortoise in Africa. And giant tortoise lives on everywhere else because humans didn't get there. But the first tortoise, we obviously and then we had to through the evolution of tools to move on. There were 12 species of elephants in Africa. The reason that the Loxodonta africana is as aggressive as it is that was the only way it was going to survive human predation. But it wasn't like meat was super easy for us to get to. We had to wipe out multiple species of with cats before. This was a slow, drawn-out process. It took hundreds of thousands of years. It was only once humans got into Europe and North America that meat was like a smorgasbord. Because then, I mean, hell, the animals in America had no flight avoidance at all, and they gorged on meat in those continents. But in Africa, it would have been a much slower, more drawn-out process. I think you and I listen, I'm not attached to. Look, if you're right about food combining, nobody would be happier than me. I hate that I have to think about stuff like that. But my experience in my body is that when I eat a salad and a wild-caught steak, I feel great. My experience in my body is that if I eat that with a carbohydrate, even a rice or potato, that I feel heavy. And it takes a lot longer for it to process out of my system. That's my experience, and it just happens to match with research that I read years ago. If I'm wrong, I'm all for getting to the truth. So I'd love to have a conversation about this, and I've always enjoyed watching you and Karen and the conversations you guys have on Facebook. So let's please stay in contact and have more. Is it
Absolutely.
a deal?
Oh, sure. I welcome it.
Good deal. Good deal. Guys, I'm sorry I got to run. It's been so much fun. Beth, I hope we achieved the outcomes you were looking for.
Definitely, definitely. I'm going to put the link
enjoy
for
watching this in retrospect. And
right.
I hope it didn't muddy up for you, Eric.
No, not at all. Listen, you know about me and Beth. We are here for truth. We're here for the answer, and we're not attached to our answers. I was vegan for 7 years because I believed it to be correct. Because people like John Robbins, who, and by the way, you know, David Wolf and these guys, who many of them aren't even vegetarians themselves anymore. I was writing a book to prove vegetarianism, and when I one day realized I was wrong, I was the first one to hold my hand up and go, I was wrong. So at the end of the day, I'm only going to be looking for the real answer. And what I do is provide an intersection between, you know, academia and research and my real life experience of being in Africa with Bushmen and observing hunter-gatherer lifestyle and trying to connect the dots between our modern day living and those things. So let's definitely keep in contact, keep the conversation going. Beth, we'll get in touch offline to do a grains. David, probably be really interesting to have you involved in that. And the rest of you, really, really great to see you. Hope to see you in the Facebook groups and on the Meisner plan and the WildFit group. And have a great day.
This is terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.